Hi everybody, I'm Judy Wilkins-Smith, and it's a pleasure to be here with you again. Last time we spoke, I spoke to you about emotional DNA. In other words, how you sometimes inherit your emotions. And of course, people, surprise, surprise, wanted to know more. They wanted to know, is it only emotional DNA that we inherit? So let's first revisit just a teeny bit what emotional DNA is. So your emotional DNA, or what I call your emotional DNA, is your pattern of thoughts, feelings, and actions. And these are generated by an event. So an event happens and you begin to have thoughts about that, and then you have feelings about that, and of course you take actions around that. And all of those create a set of patterns that then become a mindset, and the mindset then becomes not only a pattern for you, but it becomes almost set in stone. We look at it as though it was the truth, when in fact it's not the truth, it's just our truth. And the beauty of that is you can change it anytime you want to. Now, so much for the responses that I received and the overwhelming number of questions that you sent me. Because of that, I decided that today we would look at relationship DNA. So who knew you inherited relationship DNA, right? But you do. And relationships are really, really important things. They're a little bit like, they're one of our currencies. They're what run the world. And they're certainly what run your world. They contribute to your success or failure. So when I talk about relationships, I base them in sort of three broad categories. You're looking at your family relationships, you're looking at personal relationships, and you're looking at business relationships. And the better you are at each of those, the more successful you're likely to become, the more fulfilled, the happier you are. So let's look at, I inherit my relationship DNA? Seriously? Yes, you do. You see, that pattern of thoughts, actions, feelings, sensing that you have is often in collusion with or reaction to what's happened in your family system. And that, of course, is in reaction to what's happened to their family system. So now you're looking at patterns, multi-generational patterns, that may have come from decades ago. So let's suppose, for example, everybody in the family, everybody in my family is very quiet, and we don't ever challenge authority. We're super careful about what we do. Where did that come from? It's not just inherently me. I've learned it from someone. Chances are I began to learn it with my primary pattern makers, and those are my parents, my grandparents, my caregivers, teachers. Those people around me have all influenced me, but I'm the one making the meaning of what I see. So I hear people say to me, you know, I'm very careful about the way that I am because I was told as a child that I was bossy. Okay, and you made it mean that was bad. Maybe nobody told you you were bright, and actually you were quite a remarkable leader. So bear in mind, we are always reacting to and making meaning of. And if we look at where we are right now, in this day and age, in this world, relationships are right up in the forefront of everything for us. And we want to be asking ourselves, what kind of relationships are we creating, not only for us, but for those who come after us? So, going back to emotional DNA again, just for a bit. Just to reiterate, you have an event. The event creates thoughts. The thoughts create feelings and senses. Those become a pattern. That becomes a mindset. The mindset becomes the truth. But again, it's not the truth, it's just your truth. And we can make ourselves awfully miserable when we tell ourselves truths that are not kind. I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I can't do this. Or when our parents or grandparents tell us things that we make mean that we are not good enough. So let's talk a little bit about relationships, personal relationships. Now, first of all, those personal relationships, again, came from somewhere. probably from your parents and caregivers. Your parents are your primary caregivers or primary pattern makers. So if mom said nice girls do and good boys don't, then we're likely to do that, unless we decide that this doesn't work for us in the system anymore. And in fact, it feels too rigid. And the beauty of that is we sit, and this is the basis of constellations work and systemic work. We actually sit with the pattern that's trying to stop and the pattern that's trying to start. And the two are really good for each other. So where you're super frustrated is the pattern that's trying to stop. And the chances are that pattern may have come from behind you. It's not necessarily your own, unless you had a significant event that laid down a very quick imprint and you made that your truth. But the chances are, if it's an old pattern, it may come from behind you. At the same time, the pattern that's trying to start is your heart's desire for how you would like your relationships to be. I'd like to be close, I'd like to be funny, I'd like to be spontaneous. That's who you'd like to be, and that's the chapter that only you can write. And again, it's in collusion with or in reaction to the relationships of your ancestors. So if you have something that looks like a pattern that just really doesn't serve you anymore, and you're not the quiet one in the family, the chances are strong that you're starting new relationship DNA. So when I'm working with leaders, I will often say to them, talk to me about how you relate with your team members. Are you an inviter and an inspirer, or are you a driver? And then we'll look at, where did that come from in your system? Who were you in your family, and how are you now in your business? Because leaders don't just happen in a vacuum either. It came from somewhere. So what in your family system spoke a sentence that you made the truth, that said, this is the way I must be as a leader? For example, you should always take one for the team. And that's one of my biggest ouches when I'm dealing with somebody is, please don't do that. The minute you take one for the team, you and the team are going to go downhill. But where did that come from? Who told you that? Was that something that your father or your mother did because they felt that ethically and morally it was right to take one for the team because that's the way we lead? Now, leadership styles change much the same as values do and much the same as we do. They grow. And so what was valuable and right back in the day may really not work now. And what we're seeing in leadership right now is people want to be inspired. They want to be invited. They want a leader who is doing their own work so that they know that this is somebody they can follow because this is authentic. And we hear a lot about the word authentic at the moment. So an authentic leader. And how are you in relationship with your team members? If you're somebody who invites up, you're likely to have a very long, sustainable team because people can't wait to be around you and they can't wait to do more of what you do. So good leaders always do their work, and good leaders work on their relationships all the time. Instead of leaning out and running away, you'll find that they sit in and they want to know more. And so when I work with leaders, in order to become a visionary leader, not only do you have to do your work, but you have to be a leader with a voice, and a voice that knows what it's speaking about, who invites others. So that's our leadership piece. When we look at family relationships, there's a very interesting piece that we do with systemic work and constellations. We actually dimensionalize. In fact, I do this with all works of relationships, but families in particular. So we dimensionalize the family system. What does that mean, and what does that look like? So I teach online classes. I also teach in-person events, and we dimensionalize the family members. We pick representatives for each one of those members, and we ask you to place them in relationship to one another. And you will be amazed at the effect. The minute that you begin to see the spatial representation of what that looks like, it engages multiple senses. So you're seeing it, you're hearing it. We invite you to stand in it. I'll walk you through it and ask you questions about it. You'll notice who's engaged and who's disengaged. And you'll notice how you relate. And that becomes a visceral sense of relationship. You actually get, instead of trying to work it out in your head, you're seeing it straight in front of you. And neuroscience teaches you that the more senses you engage, the better the decisions you make, because you're getting more information, right? And so in what we call systems, a family system, organizational systems, we have different ways of relating. And this is illuminated in a constellation, which then allows us to also see some of the beliefs that we hold and where they come from, and if they still serve us. So again, you're getting a very tangible sense of where that pattern has come from and how it serves. And patterns, again, like values, are also evolutionary creatures. They're waiting for you to do something different to take the system to the next level. And so when you take the system to the next level, it means you get to do you. So what we're doing with that is, instead of you repeating the history of your ancestors and repeating the relationships of your ancestors, now you're beginning to have different relationships, perhaps more vibrant relationships. And I always say to people, be careful, because some patterns in the family you really want to hold on to. And when you hold on to a strong pattern, the question becomes, what can I add? And this is how a dynamic relationship evolves. So when we look at multi-generational patterns, they serve us around every turn. They're the clues to what we definitely don't want to do the same. They're also the clues to what we want to do differently and what we want to add to. But you very often inherit your relationship DNA from way behind. So you will find entire cultures that say, we have to be careful. We're not loved. We're not liked. We're not wanted. Where did that come from? Is it still relevant? Or is something asking to change? And I know, and you know, that right out there in the world right now, we're asking for change. We're asking for change in relationships, which means we're going to want to look together to see what we put down, right? What doesn't serve us anymore? What can we do differently? What is possible? Because not only is it just my relationship with you, it's our bigger relationships with each other. And when we can simply look at the relationship without judging it at all and say, hey, here's what wants to stop and here's what wants to start, we have a very real shot at relating in a completely different way. And this, I think, is what we're looking at as humanity at the moment. How can we learn to celebrate and grow those strong, vibrant cultural relationships, the strong business relationships? We are capable of so much more than we imagine. We are, as Bruce Lipton likes to say, you are bigger than your biology. Yes, we are. But that means that very often we've got to say, history, you've served us well. Here's what we know to not repeat, and here's how we're going to do it differently. So strong relationships, or happy relationships, as Bert Hellinger has said, take courage. It often means that you're going to step outside of what we call the conscience of a system. So the conscience of a system, and we all have systems. You have your family system, your sports system, your business system, and there are rules and regulations for each one, right? So typically you're not likely to go into a bar and pray, and you're not going to go into a church and cuss. These are the rules and regulations, and we call that the conscience of a system. And it's really important, because the minute that we start to do something different, you get that kind of little tweak in your stomach that goes, I wonder if I'm going to be out because I do this. But the truth of it is, when you start to relate differently and you come from a really good heart-centered place, the chances are that you're not stepping outside of the system, you're simply expanding the system. And the more you can expand the system, the more place there is for everybody to come play. Which is exactly, by the way, why places like Apple and Disney do really well. They relate to everybody. It doesn't matter the color, the creed. They don't have a judgment or a bias. They simply make the game big enough for everybody to play. And it's exciting. And so relating-wise or relationship-wise, we are capable of doing much the same thing. We're capable of allowing a large amount in and finding different ways for things to belong. So I want to touch in a little bit on business relationships. Business relationships, like all of our others, come originally from, again, bearing in mind, your family system or the biggest system behind you. In other words, your family lineage, the big family system. And in business, when you have customers, you've got to learn to relate really well. So what we do is we have sets of values, and you've got to look to see, does that serve your customer? If it serves your customer well because you're vibrant and happy, then you want to build that piece in, and you want to make that a hallmark of who you are. Now, if you didn't learn to relate that way, you may find that, again, this is the chapter that only you can write. It's a new chapter. You may have to say, sorry, family, but I can't be shut down like we normally are. So over here, I'm going to be very different. So I have a lot of people who will say to me, you know what? I'm a really good businessman. That is no thanks to my parents, and it is no thanks to my family system. They were awful. Not so fast. You had to look at somebody or something in order to know what you didn't want and to know what you did want. And you may have inherited your relationship DNA, but you are responsible for the relationship DNA that you create. So it doesn't matter what your mother, your father, or anybody else did to you. You are responsible for the relationship DNA that you will create. And when you begin to wake up to the fact that you can create anything you want to, you stop feeling so trapped. And as a businessman, you don't have to be bad at business because your grandfather was, but you do have to watch out for one thing. Let's suppose that grandfather had an event where he was cheated and he lost everything. You want to be super careful, because if that's not resolved or spoken about, then not only the event, but the choices and the decisions that he made, like, I will never trust anybody again, you can't trust customers, this demographic or that group of people are terrible, they lie, cheat, and steal. Be very aware that is going to creep into your business DNA or your business relationship DNA. So here, business and personal intersect, right? You want to look at, where are your mistrusts in relationships? Where did they come from? Are they really the truth for you right now? Or did you borrow somebody else's, like grandfathers, grandmothers, moms, and dads, and now you're eating their pizza instead of eating your own? And let me tell you, eating somebody else's pizza is ugly. It doesn't taste good. So you want to be super aware of that in business too. When you make decisions, or when you think a certain way, or when you relate a certain way in business, are you relating pure you? Or are you relating through your relationship DNA? You want to be careful of that. When we come to personal relationships, these are a lot easier to see in terms of who you are and how you are. Because I have so many people say to me, you know what? I will never, ever become like that woman, my mother. And years down the line, they suddenly say, oh my goodness, I sound exactly like my mother. Again, what we ignore or what we exclude will show up in the system, and the chances are you then begin to repeat it. So now you've gone back to repeating history and not living your own life. And this is super important. In relationships, we also find a way often if we think that, and this, please, is super unconscious, but if we have a parent who suffers, then quite often we think that we need to suffer in collusion with a suffering parent. And the inner sentence is, so that you don't struggle alone, me too. And it looks like this. My dear great-grandmother, you couldn't relate to your children. You couldn't see them. I don't relate to my children, and I don't understand why. Well, if we go back through the generations and we look at great-grandmother and we realize that great-grandfather went off to war and he died, and great-grandmother had to very quickly put food on the table, she didn't have time to look at her children. And her children picked up the pattern from grandma who would say, or great-grandma who would say, we have to put food on the table. We play later. We don't play now. That passes down to, we have to put food on the table. We play later. We don't play now. Which then becomes your mom who's saying, sweetheart, it's not all about playing. We have to put food on the table. We don't play now. I don't have time to play with you. So you have generations of women saying, I don't have time to play with you, and children saying, you can't see me. Until you come to me as a client and say, my mother never sees me. How are you with your children? I'm very busy. I have to put food on the table. And so once you begin to see what lives in your system, you also begin to see what else is possible. And you can ask yourself, will I be the first woman to understand why the other women didn't have time, how it doesn't serve me anymore, and how it's time for me to look at my children so a mother can look at her children and children can be seen by their mothers. Now, there's a funny sort of a hidden quirk to some of these relationship pieces. They give us gifts we didn't expect. So let me talk to you about a client of mine who came to me and said, you know what? I am the CEO of a Fortune 50 company. I am right up there at the top. I do exceptionally well. I have a beautiful home, a gorgeous car. I have a fabulous family. I have a wonderful wife. And you know something? My darn father still doesn't see me. He still doesn't see me. He doesn't care. It's his fault. And I said to him, okay. So your relationship with your dad struggled. Who do you think got you to be the CEO? And he said, well, it's no thanks to him. Oh, really? Who ignited the fire for you to be so well seen by others that you went all the way to the top? And he went, well, I was going to show my father. So isn't it lovely? He gave you two pieces in that relationship. First of all, he pushed you out the nest so that you would go and do something. And secondly, because of him, you went all the way to prove to him that you could be seen. Number 3 thing, you might like to just go and ask your father, what was happening in his family system? Was he seen by his father? And so relationships are pretty simple and incredibly complex. Each one of them has a hidden gem, and each one of them has an igniter for us. And the igniters are the gifts. I think one of the things that you'll hear me say the most often in this work is there's no such thing as a train wreck. Whenever you get to a place where you feel like, in relationships, for example, I'm not good enough, I'm stuck, I'm unlovable, I struggle, you want to look at where did it come from and what do I want to do with it? Your so-called train wreck is simply a pivot point. It's asking you, will you be the one who changes things in the system? Will you change your ways of relating? Will you be the one where you have 3 generations where mom and dad couldn't stay together? Can you? Or will you be the first one, and this is often a difficult one for us when we've had parents and grandparents who've either related really well, or as we so often hear, we stuck it out for the kids. Will we be the first ones who dare to not stick it out for the kids? Will we create a very different relationship DNA for them to follow. Now, going to go back to business for a minute. Our relationships at home affect who we are in business directly. And I want to give you an example of the relationships and how they can play out. So we have a thing in systemic work and constellations called a daddy's girl. And of course, the same would apply for a mama's boy. So what it looks like is this. For some reason, mom isn't available and daughter gets close to dad. It could be a number of reasons. She may be not physically available. She may be emotionally unavailable. Either way, daughter gets close to dad because the inner or unconscious piece is, I need somebody to connect to or relate to. The problem with that can become, if daughter cannot relate to mom, she may not be able to do what we call completing her relationship in the world of women. And so sometimes what you'll see is a daddy's girl can rotate into the world of business. Now she can be a very, very good executive assistant, a very good number two, but you will often hear them complain that they cannot be a good number one. And they come to me and ask, why? When you haven't completed your relationship in the world of women, in other words, you haven't grown up there, you've grown almost being what we would call a surrogate spouse. Then when you get into the business world, you're still not all the way there. You're not fully grown up, if you want to look at it that way. So you're still a daddy's girl. You relate very well to the boss, or you may become the boss and suddenly start to hire a version of dad and not understand why. This is relationship DNA. On the other hand, you may find a good place for mom and still be closer to dad because, please, I'm not telling you being a daddy's girl is a wrong thing to do. You may be a really vibrant daddy's girl and still relate to mom, but find that in the business world, you can relate incredibly well to men. So be aware that your dynamics at home, your relationships at home, travel into business. Sometimes we've also found that good consultants are outsiders in a family system. They're the ones who stand outside and look in. They don't always feel like they belong. Now, that can feel uncomfortable in some of your personal relationships and even in your family relationships. But the gift is, you may be the one who's able to look at a system from the outside and understand what's going on. Because as a kid, you learn to see and observe all of the currents and undercurrents and understand where you were safe. And now that becomes a gift for you as a professional. So any time with your relationship DNA that you find something that seems to be stuck, I would ask you, look at how it serves you. And I don't mean look at the payoff. I mean seriously look at how it's turned into a gift for you. I have people who are incredibly shy. They're some of my best observers in a room. I will use them sometimes if I'm looking at a system and say to them, what do you see? Because in order for them to survive, they relate to a system or they relate to others by being that observer or by being the quiet one who sits first to see what the rules of the system are before they engage with it. So again, it may be painful to be shy, but look at the gift it's giving you in exchange. And so what about the extrovert? The extrovert, the happy one at home, the one who seems to kind of run around the family and be in the middle of things, can sometimes be the one you want to have rallying the crowd, getting people behind you. So when people tell you, you know what, you're too bossy, don't switch off. Again, look at the relationship DNA you want to create and ask yourself, if I'm out there being an extrovert and people see me as bossy, how could I be a really effective leader if I know how to create good relationship DNA? What can I do with that relationship DNA that's going to serve my team, myself, And by the way, what I have in one system, I'm going to carry through into another. So this is going to affect my family too. So you want to ask yourself, what wants to be resolved, or what do I need to resolve that I can resolve well at work and then take it into my relationships at home? Or conversely, what did I learn and how am I incredible at home that I can take into my business relationships? Because systems are elegant things. They really don't mind if we don't resolve things in the family. They wait for us and they show up in our business systems and in our sports arenas and in our group of friends. And we keep feeling like we're hitting the same kind of brick wall at stages if it's a problem. If you're hitting a brick wall, particularly with a relationship, go and have a look at where it came from. Is this a multi-generational pattern I've borrowed? And is it time to change? Is there an event that's made me, or I've made me, a certain way? What's caused me to relate this way? And so an exercise that I often give to people, and I'm going to offer to you right now, is I want you, when we finish today, to go and sit down and write down everything that you tell yourself about relationships and about how you are in relationships. And I want you to also write down some of your deal breakers in relationships, because deal breakers will show you where you're a little inflexible and where you might want to look at where did that come from and what is that doing. Personal relationships. And this is one where people often look at me with big eyes and go, are you kidding me? We were taught, many of us or most of us, you've got to give a ton in relationships. You should always be giving more. Not so fast. What we know is that the one who gives too much in relationships is very often the one who can kill the relationship. So let me explain. It sounds generous, but if we don't have this kind of a relationship where I give, you give, I give, you give, not ticking it off, but literally a dynamic one where we enjoy giving to each other, one starts to feel like they're very much bigger, and the other one starts to feel like they're very much smaller. And the one who feels smaller will often leave the relationship to go and find a place where they can be valued with equal life weight or relationship weight. So you want to be super careful about not just giving, but being able to joyfully receive in a relationship. You also don't want to be what I call a relationship hoarder. And people are often puzzled by that. A relationship hoarder is the one who says, and you'll recognize them. Oh, no, I don't need that. Thank you very much, but I'm fine. No, I really, you keep that. Well, here's what happens. First of all, you get big and somebody else starts to feel small. But often in the mind of the person who's saying, I don't need, I don't want, here's what you'll also hear out of their mouths at some point. You know what? I never ask for anything. But the day I ask for something, nobody wants to give me what I need. That's generally because you've hoarded all of your giving and receiving. And when you cash out the chips, the ask is so big that everybody runs screaming in the other direction. So be careful of hoarding. You want a good flow in relationships, a balance of give and receive. You want to both know how to belong in relationships if it's a personal relationship. And you don't want one bigger than the other. And even if there is an imbalance, for example, in finances, there are so many other ways for the other to balance for that. There are so many things that they could do differently that hold the same value or weight as finances do. So in relationships, personal relationships, please be really careful of being the only giver and not the receiver. This is an important piece. With mom and dad, in terms of relationships, you will hear us say in systemic work and constellations, when I can receive from my parents life as they gave it to me, exactly the way that they did, even if they had to give me up, and if I can give them their place with me and simply acknowledge it. It doesn't mean I need to think they're fabulous, but I acknowledge I have that relationship. It means I know from whom I can receive in life and to whom I should pass on. Because like emotional DNA and like life, love and relationships flow through you and to the next generation. They come from the parents through to you. And so anytime you reject those parents, you are also rejecting your source of relationship, life, love, flow. Now, some of you may be adopted. Some of you may not ever have met your parents. You may not have gotten on with your parents. But the fact is, they gave you life. And that relationship is your very first relationship. And all you want to do, if the least you could do is acknowledge it, it means not that you're good or bad or indifferent. It simply is, and you are able to take from that relationship what you need to be able to create the life that you want. So, if you're an adopted child, you may find that all you could take from them was the fact that you got life. Yes, you got life, and now you can make of it what you choose. They chose to give you life, and now you can be the one who, and I hear this so often with adoptees, I felt excluded. I will tell you that you have a remarkable gift. You will likely be the includer. If you don't exclude yourself, I see many adoptees being the includers. I see them doing actually rather well in relationships, because instead of waiting for it to come to them, they often know they have to reach out. And so they can create remarkable relationship DNA. So wherever there is a break in relationship DNA or dysfunctional, what you perceive as dysfunctional relationship DNA, know that the gift is the relationship DNA that you are going to create. And what you have to offer is valuable. So I teach this, as I've said, around the world, and I will be teaching it again in Houston in September, from September the 11th to the 13th. There is a high possibility that I may also do some of this online. We have had a number of sessions online, and they're going exceptionally well. And the invitation is always to you to come and participate. Come and find out how it is that you can or can't stay in relationships. Is this yours, or did it come from somewhere? And we look with you to see, so if it isn't yours, where did it come from? What's trying to stop? And what's trying to start? And how will it live with you? If you're in relationships where you're often on the outside, where did that come from? If you're in relationships where you're scared of engaging or becoming too much, or you don't know how to fully be you, you want to understand where that came from so that you understand all that it can be. Relationships are one of those things that run the world. You want the best relationships you could possibly have. And the more conscious you are of what lives in your system, the more capable you are of creating incredible relationships. So I would love to invite you to come and learn more about emotional DNA and relationship DNA. I have some other very exciting ones up and coming that I'm going to work with in the next short while. You will hear me speak about things like fear DNA. And fear DNA, by the way, for those of you who are interested, and I've already had a lot of interest, I will be teaching that at Disney World in November from the 6th through the 9th. Really looking at your little fears, your big fears. How do those stop you in your private life, in your business life, in your family life? Where did they come from? What are they asking to be? And how you can turn them into something that is remarkable for you and with you. So I tell people, for those 4 days, you're going to be taking 4 days out of your life to change your life. Now, your relationships are no different. Once you begin to understand the levels of intricacy and the systemic ways of relationship DNA and how to use those for your highest good and your strongest relationships. Once you wake up to that, my promise is one thing to you: you won't be able to go back to sleep. Because when you know that you could do something that takes you to the next level with your relationships and touches everything and everybody around you, it gets too exciting to switch off and go back to sleep. If you'd like to know more, you'd be welcome to come and find me at judywilkins-smith.com, or simply respond to me today on Facebook. And please feel free to pass this on to your friends and colleagues, especially people who are struggling, leaders who are looking to go to the next level. By the way, organizational DNA is another one I'll be speaking about, because yes, organizations not only have DNA, which we call culture, but there are some very strong hidden patterns that we pass on, just like the relationship patterns we pass on. So as we wind down for this afternoon, and I've really enjoyed speaking about relationship DNA, bear in mind, your relationship pattern may not necessarily be yours. You may be living someone else's history. My invitation to you is to start creating your own relationship DNA and start living a very different future. I hope you've enjoyed this afternoon. Again, feel free to contact me, to leave me messages. I love reading the messages. Ask me questions, and of course I will get back to you. And it's been a pleasure spending time with you today. I will see you in the not too distant future when we get on to our next DNA. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Take care, be well. You and your relationships can change the world, one you at a time. Goodbye.